Imagine you wake up in a world where pain has been eradicated. No heartbreak, no failure, no longing, just an endless, smooth horizon of contentment. At first, it feels like paradise. But then, a creeping unease settles in. Without struggle, achievement loses its meaning. Without loss, love feels weightless. Without friction, growth becomes impossible. You start to wonder, is this really happiness, or have you been robbed of something essential? This is the paradox of suffering. The very thing we spend our lives running from might be the crucible that forges our deepest strength, our most profound wisdom. We medicate discomfort, distract ourselves from boredom, and numb our grief. Yet in doing so, we risk becoming strangers to our own souls. What if the art of suffering well is not just a skill, but the missing piece in the modern pursuit of meaning? Consider this. Two people endure the same tragedy, a crippling loss, a betrayal, a failure that shatters their world. One collapses into bitterness, their spirit eroded by resentment. The other emerges with a quiet resilience, a clarity that borders on the transcendent. What separates them? It's not the suffering itself, but how they met it. Here's the unsettling truth. We've been taught to see suffering as the enemy, a glitch in the system, a sign that life has gone wrong. But history's most revered minds, philosophers, mystics, warriors, whisper a different truth. Suffering is the fire that tempers the blade of the self. The Buddha's first noble truth. Nietzsche's declaration, to live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. Viktor Frankl, surviving the Holocaust, wrote that even in the camps, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. So the great question isn't how to avoid suffering, but how to suffer in a way that transforms rather than destroys you. Why does modern culture recoil from this idea? Because we've been conditioned to believe that happiness is the default state and pain is an aberration. We chase pleasure like addicts, terrified of the void that might yawn beneath us if we stop moving. But what if that void isn't emptiness, but the very ground of your being? What if, as Carl Jung warned, I'd rather be whole than good? Whole meaning the integration of light and shadow, joy and sorrow. Think of the last time you faced something that wrecked you. Did you rage against it? Beg for escape? Or did you, even for a moment, pause and ask, what is this here to teach me? That pause, that infinitesimal gap between pain and reaction, is where the alchemy happens. But here's the catch. Suffering doesn't automatically bestow wisdom. It's not the pain itself, but your relationship to it that determines whether it breaks you or births you anew. Most people never learn this. They either drown in their suffering or build walls so high they can no longer feel anything at all. Which leaves you with a choice. Will you continue to see suffering as the enemy? Or will you dare to ask what it might be trying to initiate you into? The answer will define not just your darkest moments, but the very fabric of your life. The illusion of control. You wake up one morning believing, as you always have, that suffering is an interruption, something to be fixed, avoided, or escaped. You take a pill for the pain, scroll endlessly to numb the loneliness, or lose yourself in work to outrun the gnawing void. But beneath these strategies, there's a silent, unspoken assumption that life should be comfortable, that hardship is a mistake. This is the hidden problem. Not suffering itself, but our delusion that we can or should eliminate it entirely. Modernity has sold us a Faustian bargain, the promise that technology, convenience, and positive thinking can shield us from life's inherent struggles. But in doing so, it has stripped suffering of its initiatory power, the ancient understanding that pain is not just an obstacle, but a teacher, the roots of our resistance. Why do we fear suffering so deeply? The answer lies in a collision of psychology, philosophy, and cultural conditioning. Aldous Huxley foresaw a dystopia where people would love their servitude, not through force, but through pleasure and distraction. In Brave New World, suffering is treated as a glitch, medicated away with soma. Compare this to our own world. Antidepressants, binge-watching, compulsive productivity, all attempts to bypass discomfort rather than face it. But Huxley's true warning was this: a life without suffering is a life without depth. When we erase struggle, we also erase meaning. Friedrich Nietzsche saw the 19th century obsession with optimism as a form of weakness, a refusal to confront reality. You want, if possible, and there is no more insane if possible, to abolish suffering, he wrote, and it really seems that we would rather have it higher and worse than ever. His point was not masochism, but transcendence. The idea that suffering is the chisel that sculpts the soul. Yet today, we pathologize sadness, medicate grief, and shame those who admit they're struggling. The result? A society that can't endure even minor discomfort without crumbling. Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, observed that those who found meaning even in their suffering were the ones who endured. But modern culture has lost this wisdom. Instead, we're taught that happiness is a default state and pain is an error to be corrected. This creates what Frankl called the existential vacuum, a hollow sense of despair that arises when we avoid suffering rather than meet it. We chase pleasure, yet feel emptier than ever. Why? Because meaning is not found in comfort, but in the courage to face what hurts. Carl Jung warned that the parts of ourselves we reject don't disappear. They fester in the unconscious, emerging as depression, rage, or self-sabotage. Suffering, in this sense, is often the psyche's way of forcing us to confront what we've ignored. But instead of listening, we numb. We refuse the descent into our own depths, and in doing so, we remain eternally superficial, never touching the raw, transformative power of our own darkness. Here's the brutal truth. We have been conditioned to believe suffering is meaningless. Religion once framed it as purification. Philosophy saw it as the forge of wisdom. Indigenous cultures viewed it as initiation. But today, it's a glitch, a malfunction, something to be fixed as quickly as possible. And yet, what if the deepest truths are only revealed in the breakdown? What if the moments that shatter you are the very ones that rebuild you? This is the fork in the road. Continue running, numbing, pretending pain is the enemy, and remain forever half alive, haunted by the sense that something essential is missing. Or turn and face it, not with resignation, but with a question. What is this here to teach me? The choice is yours, but know this, the longer you avoid suffering, the more it will stalk you, not because life is cruel, but because the soul demands initiation, and initiation always comes through fire. The fragility paradox. We live in the most comfortable era in human history, yet rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide have never been higher. We have endless distractions, yet an epidemic of emptiness. This is no coincidence. It is the unseen consequence of our war against suffering. By treating pain as the enemy, we have unknowingly engineered a society that collapses under the weight of normal human experience. A generation that cannot endure boredom without reaching for a phone, cannot face grief without sedation, cannot tolerate uncertainty without spiraling into panic. We have become anti-fragile in all the wrong ways, strong against imagined threats, yet brittle against the inevitable storms of existence. Think of a muscle that never meets resistance. It weakens, withers, becomes useless. The same happens to the human psyche when shielded from all discomfort. Children raised in overprotected environments develop learned helplessness. They never build the psychological immune system to handle life setbacks. Adults who avoid emotional risk, rejection, failure, vulnerability, remain emotionally stunted, stuck in perpetual adolescence. Entire cultures that prioritize safety over growth produce citizens who break at the first sign of adversity. This is not strength. It is fraudulent stability, a house built on sand, crumbling at the first storm. When suffering is stripped of its purpose, life loses its depth. Ancient rituals used hardship as initiation, trials that transformed boys into men, grief into wisdom, chaos into order. Modernity offers distraction, endless scrolling, cheap dopamine, and the illusion that happiness is a product to be consumed. But without struggle, achievement feels hollow. Without sacrifice, love lacks devotion. Without facing mortality, life lacks urgency. We have traded the sacred fire of meaning for the flickering screens of comfort. And now we wander, hungry for something we cannot name. When suffering is seen only as injustice, rather than a universal human experience, we breed a society of eternal victims. Every slight becomes a trauma. Every challenge becomes oppression. Every discomfort demands external redress. This is not empowerment. It is psychological enslavement, a refusal to take ownership of one's own transformation. The ancients knew suffering is not what happens to you, but how you relate to what happens. Lose that wisdom, and you lose agency itself. The great mystics, from the Stoics to the Sufis, understood suffering as the gateway to the divine, the dark night of the soul, the alchemical solve et coagula, dissolve and reform, the Buddhist concept of dukkha, the liberating truth of suffering. But in a world that pathologizes pain, we have no vocabulary for transcendence, no rites of passage, no sacred containers to hold our despair. So we medicate instead of meditate. We complain instead of confront. We escape instead of awaken. And in doing so, we miss the very initiations that could have set us free. The consequences are clear. A society that flees suffering becomes weak, shallow, and lost. A soul that refuses its trials remains uninitiated, half-formed, hungry. But there is another way, a way not of avoidance, but alchemy. Not of fear, but surrender. Not of victimhood, but sovereignty. The question is no longer how to escape suffering, but how to meet it in a way that forges instead of destroys. And that revelation changes everything. You stand at the edge of an abyss, the moment when pain can either break you or remake you. This is the crucible where true transformation begins. But how? How do you step into the fire without being consumed? The answer lies not in resistance, but in sacred rebellion, a radical reorientation of your relationship to suffering itself. The Stoics practiced amor fati, the unconditional acceptance of all that life brings, not with resignation, but with a fierce, almost defiant embrace. Do not seek for things to happen the way you want them to. Rather, Wish that what happens happen the way it happens. Then you will be happy. Epictetus. Nietzsche took this further. My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. This is not passive surrender, it is active alignment with reality. A declaration, I will meet whatever comes, and I will make it mine. Try this. Next time suffering strikes, instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Ask, what is this here to teach me? How can this forge me? The shift is subtle. The implications are seismic. Carl Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Much of our suffering stems from unmetabolized pain, traumas, fears, and repressed emotions that fester in the shadows. The breakup that shattered you, the failure that still haunts you, the grief you've never fully faced. Rebellion means turning toward the darkness, not away. Try this. Sit with your pain. No distractions, no numbing. Let it rise. Observe it. Ask, what part of me is being called to heal? What old story is this pain forcing me to release? This is not wallowing. It is soul alchemy. Viktor Frankl survived Auschwitz by discovering that even in hell, we can choose our response. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. This is the ultimate rebellion, to refuse to let suffering define you, and instead to define yourself through your suffering. Try this. In your darkest moment, ask, if this pain had a purpose, what might it be? Who must I become to meet this? The answer will not take the pain away, but it will transform it into fuel. Ancient cultures practiced rites of passage, trials by fire, vision quests, fasting, not to torture, but to temper. Modernity has forgotten this. We must reclaim it. Fast for a day, take cold showers, train for a physical challenge, sit in silence for hours. These are mini initiation, reminders that you are stronger than your comfort zone. Try this. Choose one voluntary discomfort this week. When it gets hard, whisper, this is the forge. Every great spiritual tradition speaks of the dark night of the soul, a necessary death of the old self before rebirth. The seed must crack to become the tree. The caterpillar must dissolve to become the butterfly. Your suffering is not an obstacle. It is the threshold of your becoming. Try this. Write a letter to your pain. What are you here to break open in me? What must die so I can truly live? Burn it. Let the ashes fertilize your next chapter. This is not about glorifying pain. It is about reclaiming your sovereignty over it. You have two choices. Continue running and remain forever haunted by the ghost of your unlived potential. Or turn and face the fire, not as a victim, but as an alchemist. The forge is hot. The hammer is in your hands. What will you create from the flames? Here is the secret that changes everything. Suffering is not your enemy. Your resistance to suffering is. The moment you stop fighting the inevitable, the losses, the heartbreaks, the uncertainties, you unlock a paradox. What you fully accept no longer controls you. This is the ultimate liberation. All human suffering stems from one illusion, that life should conform to your expectations. But the universe owes you nothing. It will take what it takes, break what it breaks, burn what it burns. The lover leaves, the body fails, the dream shatters. Your power lies not in preventing these storms, but in learning to dance within them. The ancient Stoics knew this. The Buddhists mastered it. The mystics whispered it through the ages. Surrender is not defeat. It is transcendence. Every spiritual tradition points to the same truth. The crucifixion before resurrection. The dark night before dawn. The ego's death before enlightenment. Your deepest pain is not a punishment. It is an initiation. A call to shed who you thought you were, so you can become who you truly are. Think of the last time you were shattered. Now ask, did that breaking not create space for something new? Did that loss not teach you what love truly is? Did that failure not redirect you toward your destiny? The universe is not cruel. It is alchemical. It uses friction to polish you into something iridescent. Viktor Frankl watched men in Auschwitz crumble while others walked with quiet dignity. The difference? Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. This space is where your sovereignty lives. You cannot control the storm, but you can become the eye within it. You cannot stop the waves, but you can learn to surf them. You cannot avoid the fire, but you can let it forge instead of consume you. Here is the most radical truth of all. You are not the victim of your suffering. You are the crucible and the alchemist. Every tear is a baptism. Every scar is a scripture. Every wound is a womb. The Japanese art of kintsugi repairs broken pottery with gold, not hiding the cracks, but illuminating them. Your fractures are not flaws. They are where the light enters. So now, the only question left is this. Will you continue to curse the dark, or will you strike the match? The choice is yours. But know this, on the other side of your greatest suffering lies the self you were always meant to become. The night is long, the fire is hot, the dawn is yours.